Okay, good afternoon, everybody. So, welcome to this second part of my lecture that will today concern the second principles modeling of oxides. And more specifically, I will describe how to access the properties of these materials at finite temperature, and in particular, to see how to model structural phase transitions. And I will go step by step through different kind of models. So as I mentioned already yesterday, just 1 second because I have to close a window here because I'm not seeing my screen. So it's problematic. Sorry about that. When you want to study phase transitions, there is a key element is that you need to identify what is the order parameter of your transition. So this order parameter is a physical quantity that switches from 0 to a non-zero value at the transition, and that's really the properties that will tell you when the phase transition takes place. And basically, a very simple and usual way to describe phase transition is the Landau theory. That is basically a thermodynamical approach that is simply saying that the stable structure is the one that minimizes the appropriate thermodynamical potential at a given temperature. And so if we are interested in temperature phase transition with free mechanical boundary condition and zero electric and magnetic field. So the thermodynamical potential that you need to minimize is the free energy. So U minus Ts, where U is the internal energy and S is the entropy. And the basic idea of the Landau theory is that F can be expressed around the transition as a power series of the order parameter. So basically, and I'm just reporting here a very simple case, is where I assume that the order parameter is P for parameter, and that F can be expressed as an expansion. So now there are many, a few interesting points to realize when you do this expansion. The first one is that the expansion around the high temperature phase remains valid above and below the transition. So you can keep the same expression above and below the transition. Then it means that the expression should be invariant under symmetry operations of both phases. So if you write the energy in terms of the order parameter, this one is when it's activated, it is breaking some symmetries. And so depending of the symmetry of the phases, only few terms here will be allowed. And that's why I didn't put all terms like P or P to the third and so on. For instance, if you assume that you have a centrosymmetric phase and that P is breaking this, of course, if you do plus P or minus P, the energy should be the same. And so it means that, for instance, only even term will be allowed. So in other words, in practice, it's often more complicated, but since the expression should be invariant under symmetry operation of both phases, you will have some term that vanishes, and you will have some term that have the same coefficient, and so you will form what we call symmetry adapted terms. So you will have a sum of terms with exactly the same coefficients. And so this will allow you to write a compact expression. And of course, this can be generalized. Here I just put P as a scalar parameter, but this can be generalized to multidimensional order parameters. Like if you assume P is the polarization, it's a vector, so it can be Px, Py, Pz, and so you have to complexify a little bit the expression. And so you can also introduce secondary order parameters. You can even introduce gradient terms and so on. But then I will stay with this simple expression, and when you do Landau theory, then you assume that these parameters are constant, except G2 here, that take a simple form. It writes like gamma T minus T node. And thanks to that, okay, you see that when you are above the transition, above T0, you see here, okay, that G2 is positive. So it means that the curvature at the energy at the origin is positive and the minimum is at 0. When T becomes lower than T0, you have a negative curvature and you will produce a phase transition. Of course, you can have different kind of phase transition depending of the sign of G4. And so you have first order or second order. I believe you are more or less familiar with that, and I will not enter into the details of Landau theory. But there is something that is interesting to notice is that I wrote this expression in terms of the order parameter P, but we have to remember that F is U minus TS. So if we take this expression and we assume that the work done on the system is 0, then you can write S like minus dF over dt. And thanks to this, you can now separate in this expression what is U and what is S. And what you realize when you do simply this is that you see the S is simply the prefactor of the T term here, and the rest is part of the internal energy. So it means that basically what the Landau theory is doing is just assuming an internal energy of this form and then assuming an entropy that is a simple parabolic shape here. So it's basically making a very simple assumption for the entropic term. And so from this, you can say, okay, but then the internal energy is basically, in my first principle framework, the Born-Oppenheimer energy. And so I can imagine that this U term that corresponds basically to a double well, I think I made a mistake here. It's a minus sign here. You see, it's minus gamma T0 P square. So I apologize. So this here is a negative curvature. This is positive. So you have a double well here. And then you can, depending of your order parameter, assume that you will explore the Born-Oppenheimer energy in terms of these parameters and get this shape. And this can be fitted on first principles. And then, okay, you add this term, and basically this term as a prefactor here, and you simply adjust this term empirically to fit with the correct phase transition temperature. And then you have a model that is not totally first principles, but where you were able to describe part of the thing from first principles. And I will provide you an example of that later. I like to emphasize that the Landau theory is perfectly suited to describe displacive phase transition. In a displacive phase transition, basically, as it was introduced by Cochrane, you have a phonon mode that basically softens with the temperature, and it's softened in a way that omega square is evolving linearly with the temperature. And typically, displacive phase transition takes place where the frequency of a given phonon mode which is 0. But you see that if you assume now that your order parameter is the eigenvector of the phonon mode that is simply softening here, if you remember that yesterday I was telling you that when you have the phonon frequency is basically the curvature of the Born-Oppenheimer energy. So you see that if you write F as an expansion of the eigenvector of the soft mode, basically the prefactor that is appearing here is the square of the phonon frequency. And if this phonon frequency evolves linearly, omega square is evolving linearly with the temperature, it's exactly what is assumed in the Landau theory. So you see, you have here a perfect theory that reproduces this linear behavior. And so that's why for ferroelectrics, for instance, the Landau theory is working extremely well. I'm just here illustrating the fact that you have this soft mode evolving linearly with temperature. These are experimental measurements, and you see it's follow exactly this soft mode behavior. I will explain a little bit later why we have this linear behavior from a theoretical point of view. But you see, so to some extent, Landau theory looks perfectly adapted to describe this, but no, can we do better to compute the entropy term? Because as I told you, in the Landau theory, it's just the assumption of a parabolic behavior that looks a little bit simple. And already during the 80s, and then a little bit later in 1994, some Karin Rabe and David Vanderbilt developed approach that we are now referring as effective Hamiltonian, just to try to get the phase transition, but from a more elaborated framework by computing exactly the entropy of the system, or exactly, but trying to access the entropy of the system from first principle. And the key idea of this effective Hamiltonian approach is the following. So we can access the Born Oppenheimer energy surface of any material, as I described yesterday. And when we do so, we integrate out the electrons, basically. Yeah? In each point of the Born Oppenheimer surface, basically, we have relaxed the electrons. So if we move on this surface, and if we can find a description of this surface in a simple analytical form, we will be able to access the Born Oppenheimer energy in a very efficient way. And the idea of Karin Reeb and David Vanderbilt at that time was to say that the Born Oppenheimer surface includes, it's a very large space, of course, because each atom can move in 3 directions. So it's a lot of degrees of freedom, but the idea was to project the Born Oppenheimer surface in a minimal relevant lattice subspace. So basically they were replacing this Born Oppenheimer energy in terms of all the R degrees of freedom as something that is projected in a restricted number of degrees of freedom that I call Xi here. And so what they assumed, for instance, for ferroelectrics like barium titanate, they were looking at the phase the low symmetry phase of barium titanate. They show that there is a mode that is condensing. So there is a pattern of displacement that is condensing at the phase transition. So they were defining a local mode where you have the B atoms here moving against the oxygen in each unit cell. And so they define a local mode as this cooperative motion of the atoms. They also consider the macroscopic strain eta. And then they were simply making an expansion of the Born Oppenheimer energy, that is here called HF, within the subspace defined by this local mode and the strain. And so they were including different terms, phonon energy here, harmonic and anharmonic terms describing the evolution of the energy in terms of this local mode, some elastic energy for the energy coming from the strain, and then some coupling terms here that is describing how the strain couple with the amplitude of the local mode. And so this was a Taylor expansion. They fitted the parameters on first principles data. And from this expression, they were doing Monte Carlo simulation, and they successfully reproduced the phase transition of barium titanate. So here, basically, you see the fluctuations are taken into account through this Monte Carlo simulation. You can also do molecular dynamics if you like. And so basically, the idea here is to work within a given relevant subspace of the Born Oppenheimer surface. So this is something that has been used by many people, widely used, not massively in the sense that it is typically restricted to cubic perovskites, because people never develop a code to do that in a generic framework. So all the code, so there is here an open source code that allows you to do that for perovskite, but it's open source, but it's restricted to the cubic geometry. And that allowed people to study simple perovskite, solid solutions, superlattices, even multiferrates, nanodots, nanorods. So there is a lot of literature, and I'm just providing some reference if you are interested. So I would say this effective Hamiltonian is simple and physically transparent, because you take one mode and you can see how it evolved with temperature. It is restricted to few selected degrees of freedom. You can include one local mode, but you can even put 2 local modes and try to see how they couple together. So you can extend, if you like, this, as I was mentioning for Landau theory, you can have one other parameter or more. Here for the effective Hamiltonian, you can have one local mode or more, and then you simply need to fit your energy expansion in terms of 2 modes instead of 1. But of course, it needs to know in advance what you want to include, so it's not fully predictive. And it's not obvious when you have various degrees of freedom that are involved in the transition. So why not including all structural degrees of freedom? And that's what I call here fully atomistic approaches. It's also possible to do fully atomistic approach, and that requires a few more steps. You need to choose a second principle form for estimating the Born Oppenheimer energy. So the idea is the same. you integrated the electronic degrees of freedom and you work with the Born-Oppenheimer energy surface, but then you have to decide how you will describe this in terms of all the ionic degrees of freedom. And so you can, I will show you, you can use a ball and stick type of approach. You can use neural network, you can use analytical functions. So it's up to you to decide, but you will decide the kind of way you want to describe this Born-Oppenheimer energy surface. So you want to provide a way to define what is E in terms of any kind of R configuration. Then what you will do is that you will sample properly the configuration space from first principle. So you will make a set of calculations for different value of R in order to identify how the energy evolves with that. And then you will identify an automatic fitting procedure to define what are the parameters of your expression of E in terms of the first principle result. And you will get a model that you will use and with which you will do a Monte Carlo simulation or molecular dynamics. So just one example here is the shell model. So people for Bion titanate developed shell models. So shell models are simple models in which you put springs between the atoms, and on some atoms you can even put a shell, and then you have different springs between the core and the shells. So that's what I call a balls and spring description. So you find an expression of the energy of your system in terms of the position of the atoms in terms of this description. And then you make what we call a training set of first principles results. And then you will adjust the spring here in order to properly reproduce the energy of the system with respect to your DFT simulation. So basically you will optimize, you will minimize a function here that is telling you what is the difference between the energy provided by your model and the real DFT things. And then you will adjust your parameters and you will find some parameters. And from these parameters, you can do some Monte Carlo simulation and you provide a description that is, I would say, comparable to the effective Hamiltonian method, except that now you have a full atomistic description that allows you to go beyond and to study in more details what's happening with the temperature. This was quite successful, but fitting these parameters remains a challenge, and it's not something easy. Typically, people who are doing that, they take weeks or I would say even years to get the right parameters, and so it has only been limited to few materials. Another way to do the thing is just to use bond valence models, assuming that basically in perovskite, the displacements of the atoms are motivated by the fact that they want to optimize their coordination. And so there is a code called SPUTS that is doing that. And here it's another version. So in the group of Andrew Rapp in the United States, they develop a bond valence model in which you see the same kind of thing. They have an expression in terms of the bond valence model for the Born-Oppenheimer energy. Then they do a first principle simulated annealing to get some configuration from first principles. And then they fit the parameters of their model in order to reproduce the first principle results, and then they get a second principle model, and from that they can do some MD simulations and access the phase transition temperature. Here is the result that they are getting for lead titanate. So they successfully reproduce the fact that the polarization in lead titanate is switching from 0 to a non-zero value at the ferroelectric phase transition temperature. So this looks also very successful. I provide here some reference of this group and the way they build this kind of model. It's a good way to produce model. Then another way to do things is, and to treat explicitly all structural degrees of freedom, is simply to generalize the effective Hamiltonian approach of Karin Rabe and David Vanderbilt by making, again, a low order expansion of the Born-Oppenheimer energy around the reference surface, around the reference configuration. Like for instance, in perovskite, you take the cubic phase And then you can go along many directions and look at the distortion produced by different motions of atoms, polar distortions, or rotations, and so on. But it's really an atomistic approach. You write your energy in terms of atomic position and strain, and then you make an expansion of that, including the lattice part, including a strain part and a strain coupling part. The advantage here is because you make this energy is the Born-Oppenheimer energy. When you make an expansion of the Born-Oppenheimer energy in terms of the atomic position and the strain, if you remember the course of yesterday, it means that the parameters appearing in this expansion have a physical meaning. And so they can be directly computed from first principle simulation. They can be computed or they can be fitted. But in this case, the parameters have a physical meaning, which is, from my perspective, very interesting. Of course, you need a code to generate the model, because you see when you have a structure with given symmetry, okay, how can you generate all the possible terms in this expansion? And then you need also to take into account the symmetries to define what I call the symmetry adapted terms here. And then you need to be able to determine the parameters. And one code allowing you to do that is Multibinit that we are developing in my group in here. So just to give you an idea of what is in this effective atomic potential, you see you have what I call a phonon part, a strain part, and a coupling part. The phonon part is simply an expansion of the energy in terms of the atomic position. So you see at second order, third order, fourth order, and you can go up to 6, 8, 9, 10 orders. And so it's just an expansion of the energy in terms of U. Then you have a strain part that is basically harmonic and anharmonic. The harmonic part is simply the elastic energy, and then you can go beyond. And then you have coupling terms between the atomic distortion and the strain. And again, you have terms like U square eta, U eta square, and you can go continue the expansion up to the order that makes you AP. And then you have typically two kinds of input files. The harmonic terms of this corresponds to physical quantity like the interatomic force constant, the Born effective charge, the dielectric constant, the elastic constant, the piezoelectric constant. And so these, they can be computed from first principles and they are directly transferred to the model. So there is no fitting procedure. Here, the physical, the harmonic terms of this expansion are really the physical quantity as they are computed from first principles. And then, of course, because you want to limit the expansion to a given order, for the anharmonic terms, what we do is that we build a training set of different configurations that we evaluate from first principles, and then we fit the force and the stress provided by the model in order to reproduce the first principle result. So I would say at the anharmonic level, the model is more effective. And when you do that, the advantage, for instance, I am reporting here some example for lead titanate, is that at the harmonic level, you reproduce exactly the first principle result. So your model is 100% accurate with the first principle simulation. It keeps the first principle accuracy because there we put exactly the physical quantities. Then at the anharmonic level, when you go along a direction and you look at the energy well, you see I fitted perfectly the curvature here, but the way the curve will change here depends on the anharmonicities, and this is fitted in an effective way. So it's not exactly at the minimum, is not always exactly at the right place, but you see the model is doing a good job. And a way to see how the model reproduces things is to compute the phonon dispersion curves, not only in the cubic reference where they were by construction correct, but to look at the minimum of the energy along some of these directions here. What are the curvatures? And these have not been fitted, but as you can see here, the real phonon frequency computed from first principles at these different minima and the phonon frequency provided by the model at those minima, you see they are in good agreement with each other. So demonstrating that the way it is fitted is quite powerful. And then with this model, again, you can do Monte Carlo molecular dynamic simulation, and you will reproduce the phase transition temperature of lead titanate, for instance. And so this model correctly reproduces the fact that at some temperature, there is a mode that will condense into the structure and will switch the polarization from 0 to a non-zero value. As you can see, if you do that directly from first principles, you capture the things properly. I didn't insist on that before, but it's true also for the other model. When you look at the phase transition temperature, you see that it's typically much smaller than the experimental one. And typically this, well, part of this discrepancy is coming from the fact that we fit on first principle simulation. At that time, it was on DLDA. DLDA is underestimating the volume and it's suppressing a little bit ferroelectricity. And so it's putting this ferroelectric instability at too low temperature. No, the way people were correcting that was to put a negative pressure on the material. And when you do that, you shift the phase transition temperature at higher temperature in better agreement with the experiment. So it is not perfect, but I would say the model properly reflects what the first principle calculation is telling us. No, the first principle calculation is not perfect, so the model is not perfect compared to the experiment. But thanks to this kind of fully atomistic model, for instance, we were able to highlight with Jorge Iniguez, one of my colleagues at the University of Luxembourg, that, for instance, in lead titanate, you have ferroelectric instabilities, but you have also oxygen rotations. And in fact, these oxygen rotations never happen, never appear, I would say, at any temperature, but they compete with the ferroelectric instability. And what we were able to show from this model is that if we ignore the oxygen rotation, so we fix the oxygen so that they cannot rotate, we will get a given temperature, phase transition temperature. Now, when we allow this rotation of the oxygen cage, even if they do not condense at any temperature, the fact that they fluctuate with the temperature will act on the polarization mode and will switch the phase transition temperature to a lower temperature. And so, for instance, this kind of competition that we were able to highlight, and it's a switch from 300 Kelvin, so it's not a small thing, is something that we can not show from effective Hamiltonian, because there is only one mode, so we will never see competition with other modes. When you do a fully atomistic simulation, you can highlight this kind of behavior, saying, okay, there are sometimes some hidden other parameters that never appear but play a role in the phase transition. And that's, I think, a nice output of this simulation. Then I have no time to exemplify, but this kind of model has been used by many different colleagues like Jorge Iniguez or Javier Junquera, now to study domain walls in ferroelectrics, to study ferroelectric superlattices, now recently to look at the formations of polar skyrmions in different kinds of materials. So this kind of approach is very interesting because it allows you to bypass basically two limitations of first principles. Basically, instead of being limited to a size of system that goes to few hundreds atoms, now you can go to few hundred thousands of atoms. So you can consider much bigger system, and you can also access finite temperature by doing more than few picoseconds. You can do hundreds of picoseconds, and you can really follow more better the time evolution of your system. Now, I have to highlight here very briefly that effective atomic potential, as I just described, but it's the same for effective Hamiltonians or even the Landau theory, they integrate out the electronic degrees of freedom. They are limited to the Born Oppenheimer energy surface. And so it's sometimes problematic. How can we treat a magnetic material and the phase transition there? So imagine that you look at the evolution of the Born Oppenheimer energy in terms of the atomic position, just here one direction R. Of course, when you change the atomic position, possibly in some configuration, the lower energy corresponds to a ferromagnetic configuration, And in other atomic position, the preferred magnetic order will be antiferromagnetic. And so basically you see that in magnetic materials, you don't even need one Born-Oppenheimer surface, but you can have one Born-Oppenheimer surface for the ferromagnetic configuration and another one for the antiferromagnetic. So how can you build a model for that? So if your system is always antiferromagnetic, like bismuth ferrite, okay, you choose the antiferromagnetic Born-Oppenheimer surface and you work with that. But for more complicated system, it's not clear how to build the model. It's the same when you have a charge order or orbital order phase transition. So how can you take that into account if you integrate the electronic degrees of freedom? How can we treat polarons, for instance, if we add an electron and we want to relax the atomic position? So these kind of problems requires to reintroduce the electrons explicitly. And there is a method that has been proposed a few years ago by Javier Junquera and Pablo Garcia Fernandez, that is to build the lattice model in a reference configuration. So here I will, for instance, define some kind of non-magnetic configuration, and I will build my lattice model in this configuration here, so the red curves. And then I will explicitly treat the valence and the conduction electrons around the Fermi level in order to properly describe if I move on this surface or if I move on that one. And so basically what they propose is to reintroduce explicitly some electronic degrees of freedom and to construct a simple tie-bending model with geometry dependence for these electron in particular. So basically you have two models. You have one model for the lattice, you have one model for the electron. But remember that the model for the lattice is working on the Born-Oppenheimer energy surface. So it means that the lattice model is not purely lattice, it's lattice plus electrons. And so the idea is to couple these two models and to add this electronic model to the lattice part, but by avoiding the double counting. So typically you have to define a reference electronic configuration, build the lattice model for this reference electronic configuration, and then add simply in your tie-bending electronic model the deviation of the electrons from this reference configuration. So it's a very technical construction that needs to be done. It's not obvious, but thanks to this kind of model, eventually we will be able to study self-consistently lattice and some electrons and to address in the future metal insulator transition, orbital charge orderings, polarons, and this kind of stuff. So I like to mention this. The paper is published about the method. Now the way to apply it to real cases is still in development, I would say. But that I think is a very nice development for the future. Okay, I focused here on lattice model, but I should say that there are many different codes also that can construct the same kind of second principles model for spins, for instance. And people are working on spin model for years. And I simply refer here to some papers if you are interested. It's the same story. You start from first principle simulation. You develop, in this case, Heisenberg type model for the spins, and then you fit the parameters on the first principle simulation, and then you use this model in a second principle framework. In the same way, I mentioned it just before, there are some automatic construction of tie-bending model using maximally localized Wannier function. So the same for the electrons, you can construct models, tie-bending models that allow you to evaluate the electronic energy more fastly than what you do when you do the real first principle simulation. So I would say at different levels, people develop what I call second principle model, lattice atomistic model, spins model, electrons model. And one of our goals within the Abinit community through the multi-binit package is simply to write an integrated package that is able to address these different models together and to produce some kind of tools for the automatic construction, not only of these models independently, but also to couple this model together, for instance, to address spin lattice problems or electron lattice problem and this kind of stuff. So this, again, this is in construction. I cannot show you any result yet, but that's the kind of direction in which we are going. Of course, I mentioned this Abinit initiative because I'm part of it, but there are many different similar initiatives. And if you are interested, I refer you to some literature here, where you will see that it's something that is very popular nowadays to try to build such kind of second principle model in order to access materials properties at finite temperature. So there are a lot of excitement about that. But instead of describing this method, what I would like to do now is to focus on specific example and try to show you how we can build these models. And so typically, if we want to address a phase transition, we can try to have some kind of systematic methodology to address the problem. So suppose that we have a material that is in a high temperature phase, like here in the cubic perovskite structure, and that at some temperature evolves to a distorted ground state that I represented here in this way, and that below these two phases, basically we see that there is a distortion that I call delta. Or can I try to address the phase transition from this high symmetry phase to the low symmetry phase? So what I propose you to do at first is to compute the phonon dispersion curves of the reference. And so I take these ABO3 compounds and I compute the phonon dispersion curves. In this phonon dispersion curve, I will see that there are some stable phonon modes, but I will see that there are also some modes that are unstable here with imaginary phonon frequency. So this negative number refer to imaginary phonon frequency I mentioned yesterday and refer to structural instability. So we can, in this phonon dispersion curve, identify what are the unstable modes. For instance, there is an unstable mode at gamma, there is another one at M, there is one at X, and I can identify what is the symmetry of this. Then I can look at the distortion here, and I can project this distortion on the phonon mode that I have computed here. And then I will realize that the distortion here, because my phonon basis is an alternative basis to describe any distortion, I can write delta as a sum of phonon mode eigenvectors. And I will see that delta has a contribution from gamma 4 minus, X5 minus, R4 plus. Here eta refer to the phonon eigen displacement vector. So I have now two kinds of information. I see what are the unstable mode, and I see which mode contribute to the distortion. And then from this information, you can select what is the second principle approach you want to apply. And you can try to identify the kind of degrees of freedom you want to include in your model. You will see that, for instance, some unstable modes here are not involved in the distortion. And on the other hand, you will see that in this distortion, maybe you will see some phonon modes that are not unstable, but that appear during the transition. And so it will be your choice to realize, okay, should I include this stable mode in my description? Of course you need, because it's participating to the ground state. But should I include this mode here that is not participating to the ground state? Maybe, because as I mentioned before, some of the modes that are not participating to the ground state can compete with the mode appearing and will switch the phase transition. So you see, you will have here to make some choice. You will identify the relevant degrees of freedom, and then you will fit a model, including these degrees of freedom, and then you will have the choice to use real parameters or effective parameters, depending on what you want to do. So let's try to apply this methodology in a simple case. Let's take barium titanate, for instance, where I have a phase transition from cubic to tetragonal, and I have a distortion from there to there. If I look at the phonon dispersion curves of barium titanate, I showed them already yesterday, you see that I have unstable modes at gamma, that is a polar mode, here, gamma 4 minus, and then I have another mode at M and another mode at X that corresponds to antipolar motions of the cations. And this defines a branch of unstable mode. Then if I look at the distortion here, and at this distortion delta, I see that this distortion delta has contributions from different polar modes here at the gamma points. And I see, for instance, in the tetragonal orthorhombic and rhombohedral phase, that you see the gamma 4 minus TO1 mode here is contributing for 95%, 97%, 97%. So these modes here that also appear, they are a very small contribution. So typically when I look at biome titanate, what's appearing during this transition is that delta here is 99% of this mode. So I'm happy. Here I have some kind of proper phase transition that arises from the condensation of a simple gamma 4 minus unstable mode. And so I can choose what I will do. I can build a Landau theory including only this mode, where my parameter P will be eta gamma 4 minus, so the eigenvector here, this motion here, and the amplitude of P will be the amplitude of condensation of this mode. Or I can eventually construct an effective Hamiltonian, or I can build effective potentials. So you see, if I choose to go to the Landau theory, it's quite interesting to realize that I will assume that my parameter is this unstable mode that is here, so this pattern of displacement. And of course, I have many other modes that can contribute to my energy here. So if we assume, and this is allowed by symmetry and the lowest coupling that we can get in the cubic perovskite. So if P and these other modes that I call phi I, so this phi I simply all the other modes that I have here in my dispersions, they will couple together, you see, at the B-quadratic level. And so if I make an expansion of the energy in terms of all the modes, I will have my mode here, my relevant mode P square, and I will have all the other modes here. And these other modes will all couple with P through these kind of parameters. Now, if I couple this term with this one, you see that I will have now a prefactor to P square that is not only omega 0 square, but that will be omega 0 square plus these things here. And so now you realize basically what happens when you have different phonon modes in a material. You have that the phonon mode that I am considering as P here as a given frequency that is omega 0 square, and this omega 0 square is this negative curvature that I have here. So omega square, my phonon frequency is imaginary here. So the square of an imaginary frequency will give you a negative number. So it means that omega 0 square here is negative, meaning that, okay, there is a double well associated to this kind of distortion. But you see that now if you have other mode in your structure that develop into the structure, that will renormalize this parameter here. And basically it will renormalize through a positive coefficient here. And so that's really what happens with you when you increase the temperature. The number of phonons that are present in your structure evolves linearly with the temperature and inversely proportionally to the square of their frequency. When you heat the material, you will start to populate the different phonon modes. And the fact that you populate these different phonon modes will renormalize the curvature omega 0 square here. And since when you look at the Bose-Einstein distribution, at high temperature, the number of modes increase linearly with the temperature, basically you will renormalize this linearly with the temperature. And that's exactly the soft mode behavior that has been observed by Cochrane. So basically, you see, I represented this here. You have a mode here where P, the energy in terms of P corresponds to a double well with a negative curvature at the origin. When you move along this direction here, that is the direction phi, you see that when the amplitude of phi increase, due to this B-quadratic term, the curvature at the origin here is renormalized and maybe will go to something that has a positive curvature. And when you reach, when you go above the phase transition temperature, you have a positive curvature here. When you are below, you have a negative curvature. You move with the temperature linearly along this line. And so this is why Landau theory is working nicely. Now what you can do also for barium titanate is to build an effective Hamiltonian. So you need to take the expansion that I mentioned before, and that was proposed by David Vanderbilt or Karin Rabe. You see, it's just a very complicated thing where you have many parameters, but you develop the energy in terms of this Xi, this local mode here, and the strain, and then you have many terms here with the elastic constant, the amplitude of Xi, many things, and then you make a set of first principles calculation, and you try to fit these parameters, and you end up with a model. And when you do that, again, you will produce a correct sequence of phase transition with this model, and you will be able to access things. If you are interested, I am reporting here a table where I show that the experiment is here. The result obtained here, I report it here. So you see the phase transition temperature from cubic to tetragonal is not too bad. Here it's a little bit below, and here it's quite good. So here, this second model here was built at a volume that was the experimental volume in the LDA, and it produced something that is quite in good agreement, with the experiment. What I like to show you is the distinction between the full effective atomic potential I was mentioning, the effective Hamiltonian, and the Landau model. When you build effective atomic potential, including all the degrees of freedom, as I mentioned before for lead titanate, basically what you take into account is all the phonons that are represented in this box here. So we are including all the phonon modes. When you build effective Hamiltonian, you work in a restricted subspace that corresponds to the branch that I have represented in green. So you consider a local mode and its fluctuation from one cell to the other. So you keep, if you like, the Q dependence of this mode. And so you project the full phonon dispersion curve in a given subspace that is corresponding basically to one phonon branch, basically. When you build the Landau model, or at least a simple one, then you take the macroscopic limit of this. You don't treat anymore the Q dependence as in the effective Hamiltonian, but you just consider one mode, the mode at gamma here. And that's basically what the things are doing. So this gives you an idea, basically, of how we simplify the description of the phase transition when we go from fully atomistic potential, effective atomic potential, to effective Hamiltonian and to the Landau model. We project in a more and more restricted subspace, but in the case of barium titanate, I showed you that the only mode that is relevant is this mode. It is the one that is appearing here. So only considering that mode already provides a good description. And so the Landau model is working in that case very nice. But now let's take another example. Let's take the case of calcium titanate. Everything is still following. I don't know how much time I still have. Manu?
So you have like half an hour more.
Okay, I'm perfectly on time, so good. The second case I want to consider is calcium titanate here. In calcium titanate, you have a phase transition from the cubic perovskite structure to a PBNM structure, and this PBNM structure is a combination of different rotation of the oxygen octahedra. So in Glazer's notation, it corresponds to A minus C plus. So you have KH rotating along the x-axis plus minus. You have the KH rotating along the y-axis plus minus, and they rotate also along the z-axis plus plus. You see, so it gives you an orthorhombic structure. And so let's apply the methodology I have mentioned before. First, I look at the phonon dispersion curves of calcium titanate. In these phonon dispersion curves, again, I see that I have some unstable branches here represented below zero, but these are the imaginary frequency. And you see that I have instability at R and M. I have also instability at gamma, for instance. Okay, I have a bunch of unstable modes. At gamma, it is the polar mode, the same polar mode as in barium titanate. At R, it corresponds to the minus rotation of the cage. So you see that consecutive cage along the z direction that is perpendicular here. The rotation is in opposite direction for the cage along this direction. And then you have an instability at M that again is a rotation of the oxygen cage, but the same rotation in consecutive planes along the rotation axis. Okay, so I have this different type of unstable mode. And then I look at what is the delta appearing here between the cubic and the PBNM phase. And I see that when I analyze the distortion, I have contribution from R5 minus, so this mode at unstable mode at R. I have a contribution for the unstable mode at M. But then I have also a contribution from another mode, X5 plus, which is the red mode here, that is a stable mode. And then I have, which is quite substantial. And then I have another contribution from R4 minus, the mode that is here. And then I have another contribution from M3 plus, that is the mode that is here. So typically you see that I have many unstable modes here. Some of them appear in the ground state, some do not appear, like the gamma mode here, and other modes will also appear in the ground state. So this mode X5 minus is an antipolar motion of the cations that is represented here. The R4 minus mode here is also an antipolar, but of the B cations that are moving in opposite direction, as you can see in the middle of the cage. And this M3 plus mode is what I call a Yan-Teller distortion. It's just a deformation of the oxygen cage. Okay, so now there are some questions. So how can we build a model for that? Which kind of mode should I include in my model? Some unstable modes are not in the ground state, and some ground state modes are not unstable. So which one should I take? So the first thing we might ask ourselves is, why doesn't gamma 4 minus appear here? Gamma 4 minus is unstable here. So why does this mode not appear? And the story is the same as the one I presented a few minutes ago, is that there is a biquadratic competition between this polar mode gamma 4 minus that I call P here, and the rotations that I call phi. And if I make an expansion of the energy in terms of P and phi, you see, I have a well associated to P, I have a well associated to phi, and then I have a biquadratic coupling between both. And so it happens that if I group this term here with the first one, you see, I can rewrite the curvature of the energy in terms of P, not as being A0, but A0 plus CO1 phi1 square. And so it happens that the CO1 coefficient here between the polar mode and the rotation, this parameter is positive. And so it means that when you condense the rotations, you will harden the polar mode. And so it's exactly what temperature was doing before. Here, the condensation of the rotation into the structure will move the system along this line, that is the line of phi. And when the rotation are large enough, basically the ferroelectric instability disappears. So it means that when you condense these two kinds of rotation in the system, this gamma mode becomes stable. And so that's why it's not appearing, is due to the biquadratic coupling between the rotation and this mode that is a competition. Okay, so now we should understand why the X5 plus mode is appearing. You remember I was mentioning that I have this mode, or this one here, that is appearing into the system. And if we look at the symmetry of this mode, we see that basically when I write now, because I know that this X5 plus mode has a given symmetry, I know that my rotations have also a given symmetry. It's R5 minus M2 plus. So it looks complicated, all these labels, but these labels are very important because they tell me the way each mode is breaking the symmetry. And due to the symmetry of the system and the way the modes are breaking the symmetry, they can couple together in a given way. That's one of the power of expressing things in terms of phonon mode, is because these modes are orthogonal and have each a given symmetry. And thanks to that, when I write my energy expansion, I know in advance by symmetry if some terms are possible or not. And when I look at the terms that are possible with R5 minus, M2 plus, and X5 plus, I realize that in my expansion, I have a term that is X5 minus square, but I have a term also that couples trilinearly the X mode, the minus rotation, and the plus rotations. And so you see, if I am considering the X5 minus mode alone, so you see the frequency here is positive. So it means that the curvature of the energy for this is positive. In other words, in my expansion, the prefactor here, A, is positive. But if I have a linear terms like that, when the rotations are appearing, now this parabola acquires a linear part. And you see this linear part will shift the red well into a green well here. And so it means that the X mode, when the rotations are present, will take a finite value here. And this finite value will allow the system to decrease the energy. So in other words, thanks to this specific coupling of the rotation with the X5 plus mode, the X5 plus mode is a slave of the rotation, but it will spontaneously appear in the system. And it has been shown, that's something we were able to show, that it is essential to stabilize the PBNM phase. If you were not taking this mode into account, then the system would not go to PBNM. It would go to R minus 3C, and there would be another pattern of rotation that would be more favorable. And so this coupling here and the inclusion of this mode is very important. And the story is the same for the two other modes that are appearing. So this is what I call an improper coupling, in this case, an hybrid improper coupling, because the mode is coupling linearly at the linear order with other modes. And this linear coupling produces a shift of the energy well that will allow the system to gain some energy. So now that we have understood that, which model should we select? Yeah? I think we cannot neglect the secondary mode like X5 plus because they are important to stabilize the system against other patterns. We cannot neglect the polar modes either because I have shown before that they compete with the rotation, and even if they are not appearing, they are probably incipient. And so they will shift the phase transition temperature as in lead titanate. So for me, in the case of calcium titanate, the only tractable approach is to use a fully atomistic approach and to use effective atomic potential. And so that's something we did recently. And we built effective atomic potential for calcium titanate. So we started from first principles data, so the full phonon dispersion curve. We're building a training set with thousands of first principle configuration corresponding to different metastable phase and paths along these different phases. So we had a set of configuration, you see, on which to fit the model. Then we were generating the model with multi-binit, defining a maximum power for the expansion, a range of interaction for the atoms that are interacting together. And from this, automatically, we were getting the symmetry adapted term and an explicit form for the model. And then combining the model generated here with the first principles data, we used an automatic fitting procedure to get a model for calcium titanate. And so you see here, I am reporting just this model where you see we have a huge number of parameters, but we don't care, they are automatically fitted. And thanks to this model, you see we can more or less reproduce the energy landscape of calcium titanate. So I'm just here reporting the first principles data that we have for different metastable phase of calcium titanate and the way the effective potential is reproducing that. You see it's not perfect, but I would say you see the lowest phase is correctly reproduced and the relative energy between the different phases is also properly reproduced. If I go to the PNMA phase and I compute the phonon dispersion curves there with my model, you see I quite nicely reproduce the first principles data as well. So I have a model that looks tractable, and thanks to this model, we were able to reproduce the phase diagram of calcium titanate, which has a phase transition at very high temperature as you can see here. There is still some debate about the way the phase transition is taking place here and what are the intermediate phase. Our model does not reproduce what was initially thought, and so we are still discussing with experimentalists to understand clearly what's happening here, but it's just to show you that it's possible to reproduce a model for a material that looks simple, but you see which is not simple because there are many different phonon modes that are involved in the transition. And thanks to this model, we can access simulation in boxes, including up to 100,000 atoms. And thanks to that, now we can try to do some prediction. And for instance, here, we are just trying to do some simulation in 1-1-1 superlattices where we fix a given rotation pattern in some part of the system, and we look at how the calcium titanate should relax. And thanks to that, we have seen that in some condition, for instance, we can make a calcium titanate ferroelectric, but I won't describe that. But it's just to show you that going now to interfaces, we will, thanks to this kind of model, be able just to look at what is the atomic coupling at interfaces between perovskite and really see how a given rotation pattern in one layer might transfer to the other layer. And it's difficult to do from first principles, and I hope we will be able to address these questions from second principles. Okay, Manu, how many minutes?
So you started, you have been talking for about 1 hour. So you have 15 more minutes.
Okay, so that should be enough to address the last example I wanted to address today, and to get just one step further in the complexity of the material I want to model, and just to try to look if we can do something for yttrium nickelate. So the nickelate ABO, the rare earth nickelate, so with a rare earth at the A site, nickel at the B site, and oxygen at the X site, are materials that have a very complex phase diagram. Of course, they're expected to be cubic at very high temperature, even if they were never observed in this cubic structure. And then they are distorted. Typically, they have a small A cations, and the rare have a small radii. So you expect they will go like calcium titanate and most perovskite to the PBNM phase that I just described for calcium titanate. That includes A minus, B plus rotation patterns. But we see that they do not stay in this PBNM phase, and at low or higher temperature, they have a transition from this PBNM phase that in fact is a metallic phase. They switch to a P21 bar N phase that is insulating. And so that's what makes this system very exciting, because they have a structural phase transition from cubic to PBNM, but then from PBNM to this P21N transition. And at the same time, they move from PBNM to P21 bar N. They have the structural transition. They have also an electronic transition from metallic to insulating. And at lower temperature, they even have a magnetic phase transition from paramagnetic to antiferromagnetic, I call here E prime type. It's a pattern that is up, up, down, down in the cubic, pseudo-cubic system. And this magnetic phase transition can be concomitant to the other transition or can be independent of them. So it's a very complicated system here where we have interplay between electronic transition, structural transition, magnetic transitions. The electronic and structural transitions are always appearing together, but the magnetic one can appear together or independently. And we see that the transition temperature is strongly dependent of the size of the A cations, or in other words, of the Goldschmidt tolerance factor. Okay, can we say something about this? And the first thing I want to say, okay, I will first address the point here from the structural point of view, and I will restart as before by saying, okay, I start from cubic, and then I go to PBNM, and eventually I go to P21 bar N. And then, as I proposed before, I look at the phonon dispersion curves. So here it's a little bit more tricky because yttrium nickelate is magnetic. So I have to choose some configuration. Here I choose to report the phonon dispersion curve in the ferromagnetic configurations. And you see that as for calcium titanate, I have basically something quite similar to calcium titanate, where I have a bunch of unstable modes here. I have unstable mode at R and M. That corresponds to the oxygen rotations. And I have another ferroelectric instability at gamma that corresponds to this gamma 4- mode. So you see all these perovskites see exactly the same thing. Only rotation and polar modes are unstable. So now when I go to PBNM, as I mentioned before, you see, I see the rotation appearing as in calcium titanate. That's the two green modes I have here. So these are the unstable modes. But then I have this X5 plus mode, you see, that is driven, I would say, by the rotation through this hybrid improper coupling. That is basically this mode that is here. That is a stable mode that is appearing, and that's very important to stabilize the PBNM phase. And then I have a few other modes that are appearing here and here, antipolar and Jahn-Teller modes that are at high frequency and that are also coming from this kind of coupling, hybrid improper couplings with other modes. And then when I move from the PBNM to the P21 bar N phase, I keep, of course, all the modes of the initial phase, but I add new modes. And the most important new mode I put into the structure is what is called a breathing mode, in which you see you have a breathing of the oxygen cage. And for those who know, in this nickelates, there is a charge ordering appearing, and basically this mode is important to reach the charge disproportionation between consecutive sites in the nickelate system. And so this mode is appearing, and we see also some additional modes appearing by couplings, but that have a quite small amplitude, and that I will not discuss here. So if you look at this mode here, you see that this mode is the black mode that is here. So this mode is appearing into my structure, but you see amazingly, this mode is the hardest mode that you can find in yttrium nickelate. So it's very surprising that this mode will appear into the structure. So what can stabilize this mode in yttrium nickelate? And so the answer is against phonon coupling. If you look at this mode here in the cubic phase, you see that, so if I put the energy in terms of the amplitude of this breathing mode in the cubic phase, you see that I have a single well here. I have a positive curvature, and this is a quite sharp well because this mode is at very high frequency. Now, I know that I have rotational modes here that are unstable, and this mode appears, and they will appear in the PBNM phase. And as you can see from what I have shown here, you see the rotation when they appear in calcium titanate, they do not appear abruptly. So you see there will be some progressive appearance of this rotation into the system. It's exactly the same as in calcium titanate. But what we have shown here in this graph is that when you compute the well due to the breathing mode, for different amplitudes of rotation, you see that the rotations are renormalizing the curvature of the mode. And when you increase sufficiently the amplitude of the rotation, you see that at some point you will destabilize the breathing mode. So you will change the frequency of the breathing thanks to the appearance of the rotations. And if you take this curvature and you plot the curvature at the origin here, that is initially positive, and that is evolving here. And if you put this curvature in terms of the square of the rotation, the amplitude of the rotation, you see that you have a linear dependence here. And so you see this linear dependence tells you that the curvature here, which is alpha here, is modified thanks to the square of the rotation. And so it means that there is a biquadratic coupling here between the breathing mode and the rotational mode, and that the prefactor of this biquadratic coupling, instead of being positive, as I mentioned before, between polarization and rotation. In this case, the biquadratic coupling has a negative prefactor here, so that when you will increase the amplitude of the rotation, you will decrease the value of alpha effective. So there is a negative biquadratic coupling that will produce what is known in the field as the triggered phase transition. So it means that I have a mode that is appearing not because it is intrinsically unstable. You see, this mode was not unstable. So why is it appearing in the system? Because it is triggered by the rotation. When I put the rotations, the rotation will change the curvature up to a point where this mode will become unstable. And if I know that, I can build a minimum Landau model that is restricted to the breathing mode and the rotational modes. And so that's what we did. We built a very simple Landau model where we were limiting the expansion up to fourth order. We could go beyond, but I think it was just for the purpose of illustrating things here. So we took a Landau model by including the R mode, the M mode, and the breathing mode. We were introducing the wells associated to these modes, their biquadratic couplings, and we were fitting all the parameters on first principles data. In this fitting, of course, I am neglecting the X5 minus mode, but this was included implicitly by taking effective parameters for the biquadratic coupling between the R mode and the M mode. So this lambda MR was renormalized to take into account the X5 minus. And then we did that for the different nickelates. And then you see, as I mentioned before, when you do that, you can fit the internal energy from first principle, but then you have the degree of freedom to fix the entropy. And so we fix this parameter in order to adjust the temperature of the metal insulator transition in yttrium nickelate. And if we use this very simple model, you understand that thanks to the biquadratic coupling that we have between the breathing and the rotations, so these green modes that are here, if I take the green modes and I put them together, we see that the curvature of QB squared that is appearing in all these terms, and that is what I call alpha tilt here, is the alpha B that I have there, plus lambda BM times QM square, plus lambda BR times QR square. And so it means that when you decrease the temperature and you will increase the value of the rotated R mode and of the M mode, according to what I have shown in calcium titanate, you will increase the amplitude of the rotations. And so when QM and QR increase, since these prefactors are negative, at some point, alpha B tilt will become negative, and that will produce the phase transition from PBNM to the P21 bar N phase. And so we try to mimic what should be the phase diagram of nickelate thanks to this very simple model. And we were getting the blue curve that is here, that you see is not reproducing exactly the experimental data, but here it was done fully from first principles, and we took the simplest model we could find. Of course, we should include the strain, we should better include the magnetism, we should include secondary mode, but you see the trend is already well reproduced by this kind of behavior. And so we propose here that the phase transition in nickelates is something that I call a triggered phase transition. So it's coming from the triggering of the breathing mode thanks to the rotation. But there is still a question, is the cooperative coupling that we have between the breathing and the rotation, because usually in perovskite, it's not the case. When you have one mode, it's fighting at the biquadratic level with other modes. So I was very puzzled when I saw this cooperative coupling between rotation and tilt. And the way to answer that is to look at the electronic band structure, because here we are in a specific case where we are in a EG1 configuration. And typically, in this case, I am representing the ferromagnetic band structure, but you see that yttrium nickelate in the PBNM, in this case in the cubic phase, is a metal where the Fermi level is in the middle of a band. And so I just simply recast this band structure in the Brillouin zone of the P21N-like phase to see what's happening. But you see that there is a band here, and when I put this into the Brillouin zone of the P21N-like cell, I see this point here as a crossing between two bands because I have a band folding at this point here. And so basically what's happening in this system is that when you take this cubic phase and you put the breathing, you see that because the breathing is at a Q point that is 1/2, 1/2, 1/2, it will open a gap in the band structure here. It will leave the degeneracy at the point that is 1/4, 1/4, 1/4. And that's exactly, you see, when we look at the band structure without and with breathing, you see that you open a gap at this point, thanks to the breathing. But you see that when you do that in the cubic phase, the opening of the gap is well above the Fermi level. And so it's not really affecting anything in the system because these levels are empty. So if they move, if they are empty, it doesn't change the energy. But so what's happening now when you put the rotation into the system is that the rotations of the oxygen are changing the angle, nickel, oxygen, nickel bond angles. And so you are modifying the hybridization that you have between nickel and oxygen, and you are rescaling basically the width of this band, of this EG band here, that is not purely EG, but is EG hybridized with oxygen. And thanks to this rotation, you change the hybridization and you see that the point here is progressively moving down from somewhere to the Fermi level. And at some amplitude of rotation, this point here reaches the Fermi level. And when this point is at the Fermi level, if you activate the breathing mode, of course, then you will modify the position of the energy of the electrons at the Fermi level, and you will open a gap at the Fermi level. This is called a Peyer's instability. And so, in other words, the way we can understand this phase transition, at least from the DFT analysis, is a Peyer's instability, but which is not initially present. It is not there in the cubic phase, but that is triggered by the oxygen rotation. So that's the way, basically, we can interpret the phase transition, at least from first principles. Not everybody is still agreeing on this picture, but that's at least what I can get from the from the DFT simulations.
Okay,
so,
Philippe.
Yes.
I think you're probably going over time. So how long do you need to finish?
I think I was on the way to finish because I still have 1 or 2 slides. I will just maybe go through in 1 or 2 minutes. And if I have questions, I can just present them a little bit.
Go ahead then.
Okay, so this was to show you that we can, you see, understand the phase transition, but starting from the atomistic point of view, of course, because we work on the Born-Oppenheimer surface, the fact that we have this triggered instability doesn't mean that the lattice is doing everything. You see, the parameters of these models here, of course, comes from the behavior of the electrons. And so here we interpret this biquadratic coupling, this cooperative coupling, as coming from this hybridization between oxygen and nickel orbitals that produce this Peyer's instability. And so we can also try to explain the role of the magnetism, but that's beyond what I wanted to do today in the illustration of this way to address phase transition. And okay, so I just like to mention that maybe it's something that has been addressed by Antoine, I don't know, in his presentation. Unfortunately, I was not able to follow, but he was suggesting that the MIT in Nikelase might arise from a divergence of the electronic susceptibility. Maybe you refer to that in his talk. It's in a nice paper that appeared in PhysRevB last year. I like to say that my interpretation here remains totally in line with that. And basically the softening of the breathing that I was mentioning here and the susceptibility that yields to the appearance of delta n is some kind the same thing, because these two parameters, the breathing and delta n, they are pseudo-proper in the sense that they have the same symmetry. So at the energy level, they couple bilinearly. And when you have a bilinear coupling like that, it's the story of the egg and the chicken. So you never know which one is driving the other one. There are just one parameter and one will drive the other. But it's possible to show that finally it's two different, from my perspective, it's two different languages to say the same thing, even if we can agree or disagree on what is producing this delta n, if it's more a Mott instability or if it's more pairs. That can maybe differ from DFT or DMFT things. And of course, this is something that we can debate, and that is not yet totally clear within the community, I would say. I have also remarked here about how to treat paramagnetism in DFT. It's not easy. If you are interested, I can comment a little bit. And I wanted also to mention for people who are working in that field that Ian Taylor and breathing distortion that we can read in many papers, in fact, are numerous. So if they are not corresponding to a unique pattern, typically there are many different patterns that corresponds to what people call a Ian Taylor or breathing distortion. And we made an inventory of that in a recent paper with one of my students. And I think it's very important when you have a system to properly identify the relevant pattern, because that's why I insisted today that when you have a distortion, you should project on the eigenmodes, on the phonons, on the proper phonon modes, because thanks to that, you will know the symmetry of the distortion that is appearing. And knowing this symmetry will tell us with which mode it can couple and at which order. And so it's very important. One Ian Taylor system is not another one. So it's there are many kinds of Ian Taylor, there are many kinds of breathing distortion. Okay, so I am now at the conclusion of my talk. I think I hope I convinced you that first principles DFT simulation has become a useful standard tool to study material, although, of course, showing known limitation in terms of accuracy in some case, especially for correlated systems or for band gap, and also in the range of accessible scales. So the role of what I call second principle is to go multi-scale in order to extend the predictive power of DFT to larger scale. I think DFT can help identifying and selecting relevant degrees of freedom and then determining or fitting the parameters that I try to convince you today, to see how from the DFT we can try to identify the relevant parameters to include in the second principle model. And of course, there is always a compromise between keeping a physically transparent simple model or to take a more accurate complex model. I would say for calcium titanate, I went to a more accurate complex model. For the nickel AHC, I took the simplest model that is physically transparent, but maybe not so accurate. Okay, and so I want to emphasize that there are many efforts nowadays to define standards and achieve automatic procedure to construct such second principles model. I would say that second principle is at some kind of stage like first principles was 30 or 40 years ago. Everybody has a code, but nobody can use the code of order. We should move to some kind of standard code, and that's what we want to do in Abinit and Multibinit, for instance. So, okay, thank you for joining me today, and I am glad to answer your questions now. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe. So there were no questions during the talk on the chat, but maybe people have some questions for you now. So please open your mic and identify yourself and go ahead with the questions. Okay. okay, so I don't.
It's not easy.
Hello.
Hello, yeah.
Here is Lin Fang.
Yeah,
I have a small question.
yeah, can you please state your name and where you're coming from?
My name is Lin Fang Lin. I'm from University of Tennessee.
Okay, okay.
I have a small question. You said the rotation of the oxygen make the band has a crossing.
You refer to probably to this thing here?
Yes.
No, I'm not saying that the rotation are making a band crossing. I'm simply saying that, you see, it's a little bit tricky here. I had not so much time to explain, but when you plot the electronic band structure, of course, you need to do it in a given symmetry. And so you will make it for a given unit cell. And that will give you a description. If you change the unit cell, of course, you will change the Brillouin zone and you will change the description. So what's happening is that when you are in the cubic phase, you have this electronic dispersions that I am reporting here. So the unit cell there is the 5-atom perovskite cell. So now, of course, if I want to put the breathing distortion, or if I want to put the rotations, these are instabilities that are appearing on the zone boundary. So when I condense these distortions, I will increase the size of the unit cell. And if I increase the size of the unit cell, I will decrease the size of the Brillouin zone. So it means that if I want to represent this electron dispersion curves in the Brillouin zone that is associated to the unit cell with the mode, the rotation and the breathing mode condensed, I will have to fold back some part of it. And it's due to the folding of this branch here that I see here something as a crossing. You see, this branch here and this one, so this branch and this branch are basically this and this, but I have to, so this part here will appear here, if you like. You see, so this branch will be, no, it's more this one, because I am folding back this R point is going to gamma, and so this part of the branch will appear here. And so I will have something like this, and that's what I see here. I have something like this, and then it's continuing that way. So it's not the rotations that are producing this, it's simply the way it appears, if you like.
Okay, I see. Thank you.
But what is interesting is to see that there you have degenerate states there, and then the appearance of the breathing will leave this degeneracy, basically.
Yes, I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? So I have a question. So about the praseodymium and the neodymium, which have first order phase transitions, are you able to say something about the order of the transitions in your model?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That's also something that is a lot under debate. So when you look at the model we have developed here, you might assume from this simple Landau theory here that the transition is second order, simply because we made it second order. We stopped basically the expansion at fourth order. No, experimentally, I'm not so clear for the yttrium nickelate. I discussing with some experts like Marisa Medat, she is thinking that the transition is more second order for these cases than for these materials here. But in any case, I like to mention that even for yttrium nickelate, it's not because our theory is saying here it's second order that it should be second order. If you look, for instance, at the example I have shown today, like barium titanate or lead titanate, you see they perfectly fit with this kind of model here. And basically the first order of the transition is coming from the coupling with the strain. It's particularly true in lead titanate. So I could imagine that in the nickelate also, you see, if you include properly the coupling with the strain, you will change the order of the transition. So that's at the level of, I would say at the level of theory that I have with the model that I have here, I cannot really state for sure what is the order of the transition. Okay, so that's the first thing. Now, we believe in any case that the transition in the nickelate, in this regime here, should be more first order. Why? Our guess in this region here, and you see that when we put our model, which is the blue curve here, with our model in this regime here that you are just addressing, neodymium, samarium, our model predicts no phase transition. And so our guess is that, and I think it's, maybe I have a slide here. Yeah. So our guess is that in this region, without the magnetism, the system won't see any transition from PBNM to P21N. And in this case, it is the fact that you activate the E prime time magnetism that will allow you to produce the transition. And we have I have two kinds of arguments for that. The first one is that we did some calculation for neodymium nickelate. If you do a DFT calculation for neodymium nickelate, if you don't put the right magnetic order, then you stay in the PBNM phase. And so for instance, if I do ferromagnetic or I do AFM-A, for instance, I stay in PBNM. When I put the E prime AFM up, up, down, down, then I activate the transition from PBNM to P21N. And so what is this connection between the magnetism and the breathing appearance is something that I try to explain in the graph that is here. You see, there is basically a coupling between the breathing mode and the E prime type configuration that is linear in B and quadratic in the S thing. And you see, I just took a chain here just to exemplify what I mean. So you see, at the magnetic level, I have a configuration that is plus, plus, minus, minus, plus, plus, minus, minus. You agree with that? So that's the magnetic order I have along one direction. And my breathing mode is plus, minus, plus, minus. So you see, you believe it's not clear if for the magnetism we have plus 0, minus 0, or if we have plus, plus, minus, minus. But what is clear is that we should have a large magnetic moment on the big cage and a smaller magnetic moment on the small cage, basically. So, but then you have this kind of configuration appearing with a big magnetic moment on the big cage, and that can be plus or minus, and a small one on the small cage. Now imagine that you switch S. If I switch S, I will go from plus, plus, minus, minus, it will become minus, minus, plus, plus. You see? And if I don't change the breathing, you see that basically the configuration I get here is exactly the same as this one. You see? So it means that switching S doesn't change the energy of my system. Now, if I switch B, you see that I go to this configuration. I don't switch F, I switch B. I go to plus, plus, minus, minus, but now I have minus, plus, minus, plus. Now, if I switch B, I put the big magnetic moment at the small side and the small magnetic moment at the big side. So this will definitely change the energy of my system. So basically, it means that there is a coupling term between B and the magnetic that is linear in B and quadratic in S. And this coupling here is telling you that when you will activate the E prime magnetism, you will automatically shift the well due to the breathing. You see, it's the improper coupling I have mentioned for the X5 minus mode. It's exactly the same kind of coupling I get here. I will automatically drive BOC to a non-zero value. And we believe that it is this help produced by the magnetism that will produce the phase transition in these two materials. So it means that these materials don't want to be, they don't have enough rotations to produce the phase transition through the mechanism I have explained. But when the magnetism appears, the appearance of the magnetism shifts the well to lower energy and help and compensate the lack of oxygen rotation and will produce the phase transition. But in this case, the phase transition is produced by the magnetism. And so you see, you will automatically have some kind that is first order. It will be more abrupt because you shift the well abruptly when the magnetism appears.
Okay. Okay.
So that's my interpretation.
Yeah, very nice. Thank you very much. Any more questions?
I have one naive question.
Okay, Ricardo.
Yeah. First, it's very nice here in Leuch, but nobody came. I don't know why.
Sorry?
It's very nice here in Les Houches, but nobody came. I don't know.
I am very sorry. I wanted to come, you see, but...
No, anyway, my question is maybe a little bit naive. If I understood well, you mentioned that the soft mode temperature dependence was linear. And I always thought it was quadratic. It was 1 minus T over Tc squared. Did I miss something in that discussion?
No, what I am mentioning,
Yeah.
and that's in the soft mode theory of Cochrane, is that is the square of the frequency that is linear.
Oh, okay.
So that's maybe what you, I don't know where it was. I think I asked this paper of Cochrane. That is, I think, you see, so you see it's omega square.
Okay.
That is linear, evolving linearly with temperature, and that's really an experimental fact. You see, it's the frequency square. But this frequency square is basically the prefactor of the square term here, and so of course the parameter here will evolve like the square root. But
yeah, okay, no, it makes sense. It makes sense. I missed this point. Yes.
Okay, sorry if I was not clear on that.
Okay. Any more questions? So I have a final question, and then maybe we will leave it here. So, you know, there have been several attempts and predictions of ferroelectricity or polar configurations in the nickelates.
Mm-hmm.
And so now that you have this very detailed, very complete description, can you revisit a little bit the problem? Can you say something more? Is there a way to make the nickelates ferroelectric, or do you think this is really impossible?
Yeah, so that's a nice question. I would say that we don't have the tools yet to do that very carefully. You see that for the case of the nickelate, I have only mentioned this very naive Landau model that we have developed that is, I think, interesting at the level of the physics, but does not allow to be fully predictive and to see the emergence of new order parameters, for instance. So what I should do for yttrium nickelate is what I have described for calcium titanate. I should start from the phonon dispersion curve I have here and build effective potentials for yttrium nickelate. That includes all the phonon modes, and try to see if I can just, I will for sure reproduce the PBNM phase, then see how I can reproduce the P21 bar N ground state, and then investigate how to change the ground state. The interesting point related to your question is that you see in the phonon dispersion curves here that you have a ferroelectric instability in the nickelate. And that's true in all perovskite with a small tolerance factor. If the tolerance factor is larger than 1, you will have a B-type ferroelectric instability. If the tolerance factor is smaller than 1, you will have A-type ferroelectric instability. So the mode that is here is not a motion of nickel, it's the motion of the B cations against the oxygen, dominantly. Okay, so now this mode is there, but due to the competition between polarization and rotation, when you put the rotation, you will suppress this mode due to the positive biquadratic coupling that will stabilize that mode in the PBNM phase. Now, if you find a way, and I think it's one of the way that was, I think there was a Nature paper by Greg Fenney, Darrell Schlom, and I think that the idea was to say, if I can suppress the rotation.
This is from Chang-Bohm and Jim.
With Chang-Bohm, I think there is James Rondinelli and Greg Fenney on the paper. So if you know, suppress the rotation, you freeze you forbid the rotation by some way, then you don't have the suppression of this ferroelectric mode, and it should reappear. And that's what they are claiming they are doing in their paper.
Okay.
So yes, I would say if you can suppress the rotation enough, you might see this ferroelectric instability reappearing. Or another way, maybe, because just I am now thinking a little bit in terms of what we have seen recently in calcium titanate. In calcium titanate, we have seen that we can even produce ferroelectricity, but more going, instead of going from PBNM to something without rotations to induce the ferroelectricity, we might think about changing the rotation pattern. So if we go from PBNM to R-3C, then due to this ferroelectric instability, we will not go to R-3C, but we will go to R3C. And we will produce ferroelectricity, but in the R3C phase. And I think that should be an easier way to get probably ferroelectricity in this system. Because we know that the R3C phase should not be too far in energy compared to PBNM.
So you think that lanthanum nickelate is R-3C, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So it's closer.
So I would say, I don't remember if we checked that or not, but I believe that yttrium nickelate in the R3C phase should not be too far in energy.
Okay, okay.
So that might be a way, maybe to take a substrate that force the pattern, maybe a substrate in the 1-1-1 direction, a 1-1-1 substrate with a rhombohedral substrate that force the R3C pattern in the nickelate. That might be eventually a way to make them ferroelectric.
Okay, maybe we
But I don't think it has been observed, and I think there were some work by Sarah and Jean-Marc taking lanthanum aluminate. I don't think that was not observed. So, okay, it's maybe not working that way.
Okay. So I think in the paper of Chang-Bohm, they were growing on LAO 111. Mm-hmm. That's exactly the mechanism. But it was polar. They argue it's polar, but could not be. I mean, they didn't show any switching. You know, so they had a polar state in the metallic phase, I guess. Okay, but thank you.
But their argument there is exactly that. I think that they suppress the rotation, and so this would allow for the alternative instability.
Yeah. Okay, no, thank you very much for the detailed explanation. Okay, are there any more questions, or should we leave it here? I see no more questions, so I think we should thank Philippe again.
Okay. Thank you very much for coming to this online lecture, and enjoy the rest of the school.
Okay, so Mark, you want to say a final word?
I don't think so, except we'll see you all tomorrow at 10 Paris time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good evening. Or have a nice day for those of you in the US.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, Mark.
Bye-bye.